Hello, my name is Will McMahon. I'm Director of Action on Empty Homes, and I'd like to welcome you to this event. The first thing we're going to do is hold a minute's silence because it's the 11th of the 11th, and in the UK we have a minute's silence to remember those who have died in conflicts in the past. Thank you. Following the success of our event as part of the COP26 Fringe Week in September, Action on Empty Homes and Scottish Empty Homes Partnership and Architects Climate Action Network are today launching our call to action for whole house retrofitting of empty homes to tackle the climate and housing emergencies that we face. This is our second COP26 event this week. On Monday 8th, the Global Empty Homes Network held a 1-hour event where representatives from North and South America and Europe discuss the links between climate crisis and the many millions of empty homes that exist across the world and what a more sustainable use of our built environment might look like. You can watch a recording of that event on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Today, we have a panel of experts from England, Scotland and Wales who will lead us through the different aspects of how retrofitting homes can make a contribution to meeting the climate change we all face, the climate challenge we all face. My job is simply to facilitate the event and to field any questions that might come through on Facebook or YouTube. And if you have a question, please type them in the box and they'll come up on my screen and I'll ask them at the end of the presentations. Our three speakers are in reverse order. Joe Patterson from the Welsh School of Architecture, who will be talking about exactly how deep retrofitting is done. Andy Mosley, Scottish Empty Homes Partnership, he will be talking about the assets on our doorstep as we move towards net zero. And we were due to be joined by Gloria Lowe from the Architects Climate Action Network. But I think Gloria's unwell. I think she has the flu, a bug that is going to spread across Britain in the next couple of months, I think. So we're without her and we're very sorry about that. So the meeting will be finishing at 12 rather than 12:20. Our first speaker is Bridget Carey, who is our Consultancy and Projects Manager and will introduce our call to action. Over to you, Bridget.
Thank you, Will. I will just bring up my presentation. Just bear with me. Sorry, doesn't seem to be able to share.
Do you want to speak to him, Bridget?
Yes.
Okay.
Just a moment. As some of you will be aware, or well, most of you probably will be aware, we have today is the Built Environment Day at COP26, and earlier on this morning I managed to just catch a snippet of the presidency event this morning, which was kind of opening the Built Environment Day. It was a very interesting discussion, the bit that I heard, and what I Sorry, I'm still struggling to find my presentation. Okay, there we go. Yes, the key message was that the built environment is a decisive sector. And what is meant by that is that the built environment has an absolutely crucial role to play in the reduction of carbon emissions as we move forwards. Over 300 countries have now signed up to prioritise reducing carbon emissions in the built environment. However, there was broad agreement, just again from the bit that I heard, that change won't happen unless it happens at the local level as well as at the strategic level. And that message from COP26 provides really valuable context for our call to action, which is a call to action to retrofit empty homes as they're renovated. So, as Will mentioned, we formed a coalition with ACAN, the Architects Climate Action Network, and with the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership. And we've been inviting people to sign up to our call for action, which they've been doing, which has been great. So, just to move through why we feel that action is needed now. Britain's facing three major emergencies. The climate emergency, genuinely affordable housing supply, and health emergencies, which hit our most vulnerable communities the hardest. In Britain, almost 359,000 homes are standing empty, while over 330,000 people are homeless or stuck in temporary accommodation. Those living in poor quality, expensive to heat housing face deepening fuel poverty. As we've seen, energy prices are already rising, and the cost of electricity will increase further as the gas grid is phased out. These households urgently need sustainable, affordable warmth, which is deliverable through fully retrofitted empty homes. In Britain, again, 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions are operational carbon emissions from residential housing. So that's heating, hot water, and cooking in the main. Energy efficiency and sustainable fuel production achieved through retrofitting are essential to reduce the climate impact of housing. A programme of retrofitting and as they're renovated long-term empty homes would increase the supply of energy efficient low emission homes. It would increase the supply of affordable rented housing, and it would help to reduce fuel poverty. This would make an important and significant contribution to providing the high quality social and affordable housing needed across Britain that is both environmentally friendly and sustainable at the local level. The construction of new housing and the clearance or demolition of existing buildings releases embodied carbon into the atmosphere. This also helps to accelerate global warming. New homes are often developed in areas where there are already high levels of empty homes and other empty buildings. Building is increasingly extending onto greenfield sites. Local empty homes and buildings should be conserved and retrofitted in order to reduce embodied carbon and reduce the number of empty homes that need to be built to meet housing need in these areas. Revitalising the diverse range of existing empty housing will accelerate growth in the breadth of knowledge and experience and expertise in the construction, retail and finance sectors, without the need to decant existing occupants or undertake piecemeal works in a piecemeal fashion. We know that reliance on top-down approaches alone won't deliver. Government-led Green Deals do have a role to play, but relying on these top-down approaches alone also misses the opportunity to build local and sub-regional supply chains and skills that benefit local economies and enhance community well-being. A programme of renovating and retrofitting empty homes, breaking away from big business and replacing it with integrated local and regional networks, would create a sustainable model for the future, delivering whole house, whole economy solutions to the climate, affordable housing and health emergencies. Centralised approaches alone cannot deliver zero emission housing, affordable housing, or reverse the tide of fuel poverty. We're calling for government intervention and funding targeted towards collaborative local and sub-regional solutions for empty homes. As a coalition, we call on national governments to firstly support owners of empty homes to bring them back into use as zero-emission social housing. Second, to give local authorities more powers and resources to bring long-term empty homes back into use as zero-emission social housing. Thirdly, to incentivise social housing providers and community housing schemes to take on and retrofit long-term empty homes as part of the targets to deliver social and affordable housing. And finally, to invest in local and sub-regional supply chain development and green skills to rebuild local and sub-regional economies and enhance local community life. That is our call to action. Empty homes can lead the retrofit revolution and reduce our carbon emissions, but leadership should be kept local. You can sign up to support our call for action and find more information by visiting our website, which is www.actiononemptyhomes.org. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Bridget. Thanks for that introduction. I'm going to hand over to Andy Mosley now. Andy.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. So what we know, I'm going to focus on empty homes as the asset on our doorstep. As we say, we know that empty homes, we think, yeah, they should be part of the retrofit revolution. The question is kind of why isn't it happening at the moment? And I want to sort of start off by sort of looking at that, looking at the contribution empty homes can make, and some suggestions for how that can start to be realised. What we know we need to improve the energy efficiency of our existing housing stock. We know that we need new homes to be built and they should be designed with net zero in mind. And we also know retrofitting homes improves energy efficiency, reduces carbon emissions and alleviates fuel poverty. From that sense, it seems to be, well, this is a no-brainer, then we should be doing it. It appears, however, that there's several things we either don't know or aren't acting on at the moment. So what are these? Well, we know and we understand the need to work towards net zero in new build, even if it's not necessarily getting there quick enough, or we're not doing enough to perhaps prevent the continual building of homes that we know might need to be retrofitted either by 2030, 2045 or whenever. But we do know we need to work towards it. But what we don't seem to understand is that carbon emissions created by building a home, it's not just about the energy that we use in a home when we're heating it. It's about actual building of a home. And these carbon emissions can account for 20 to 50% of the whole life carbon emissions of a new building. It doesn't make sense to continue to build if this is the carbon emissions and if we've got stock that's available to us. We understand that we need more social and affordable homes to meet the housing demand. But what we don't seem to understand is that this doesn't have to just come in the form of new builds. We don't understand that there's an alternative to build, to sort of paraphrase Greta Thunberg, that is not blah, blah, blah. And if I said that, well, there is an alternative to continually building, and if we do it, actually what we can manage to do is create more homes for less money in less time. We can reduce our embodied carbon emissions. We can help to revive our town centres and realise the visions of 20-minute neighbourhoods. We can sustain some of our most fragile communities, and in doing so, we can also reduce population drift and ease some of the pressures on our largest cities. We can reduce our reliance on cars, and we can preserve more of our green spaces by doing something that isn't build. If I told you that, you'd probably say, yeah, that sounds too good to be true, so therefore it probably is too good to be true. But actually, it probably isn't. There is an alternative, and it's something that we're doing every day of our lives now, just not for this particular thing. What it is it's really time to recycle our empty stock. So as well as thinking about retrofitting, let's think about recycling. There's a lot of it, almost 360,000 across the UK and over 47,000 in Scotland. Of these, over 30,000 have been empty for longer than a year, and many have been empty for 2 or 4 years, 5 or 9, 10 years or even longer. We know if we recycle cardboard, bottles, paper, it reduces the demand for more because we're using these materials again, so we're not having to get the resources, we're not having to go through all of that process of actually getting more. The same thing works with refurbishing empty homes. It improves the efficiency, the energy efficiency of existing buildings, and in doing so, it extends the lifespan of the building. And if the one building has a longer life, that means we don't need to build the other one. We don't need the embodied carbon that comes with replacing that old building. So we come back to the question, why aren't we doing this? We know the case for retrofitting has been made. These are quotes that come from a report, The Retrofit Revolution, that's been recently published, and from a Green Finance Institute report that came out last year. Energy efficiency measures and other building retrofit works are among the most cost-efficient ways to reduce emissions, with co-benefits including improved living standards, healthier, more resilient communities, the delivery of new skilled green jobs in every part of the country. Will help the UK deliver on its climate targets. If we look at the Retrofit Revolution document Bankers for Net Zero published recently, decarbonising the UK's existing stock of homes and buildings is not only possible, it's a huge and undervalued opportunity for the UK, an economic, social and environmental success story waiting to happen. So it appears as if, from that basis, the case is made for retrofitting. Why isn't the case being made to include empty homes within the retrofitting? It appears that it's being left out of the vision. Sadiq Khan, in June this year, declared a retrofit revolution. It's interesting, we clearly should have, copyrighted Retrofit Revolution because it seems to occur in so many different documents at the moment. As Sadiq Khan said, we'll make it easier for social landlords and UK building firms to work together to upgrade ageing homes in the capital. A lot of things that were talked about there dramatically increase the pace of projects that upgrade cold, damp housing stock to homes fit for the future. Laudable ambitions and great ambitions that we want to see being achieved. But interestingly, there was no reference in his statement to retrofitting empty homes and thereby increasing the housing supply and lowering the need for new builds. Similarly, the Green Finance Institute's paper, it has 21 demonstrator projects in it, none of which are involving bringing empty homes back to use. Bankers for Net Zero and other bodies that are calling for action towards net zero also leave empty homes out of the picture. The question then becomes, well, why is this happening? There seems to be certain myths around empty homes, which it's important, I think, to burst to really show that actually they can be used. First big one, empty homes are in areas where there's no real demand for housing. Some facts, Edinburgh and Glasgow both reported more than 3,000 properties that have been empty for more than a year. So that's the two biggest cities in Scotland. Don't get me started on London. I'm sure anyone can walk down streets, whole areas, and notice a large amount of homes lying empty. And even if they are in areas where there's no real demand at the moment, what we also have to be aware of is there's a need to relieve the pressure on housing in our towns and cities. If we regenerate parts of the country that have been left behind, that can help prevent our cities having to extend ever further, ease the pressure on housing stock, help to reduce the cost of housing in those cities. So we can also think about, if there's no real demand, what are the bigger economic drivers that can be used to change that and encourage people to stay in communities? The next one is empty homes are the wrong type of property. That's a myth for a couple of reasons. First of all, they come in all shapes and sizes. With some of the work that we've been doing in the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership, We've looked at areas that are seen as suffering from high demand for holiday homes, as if it's only large properties in there. What we find is actually there's large numbers of small properties, there's flats, there's a range of different housing in every one of our towns and cities. And also, homes can be converted. The Houses into Homes scheme that was launched by the Welsh Assembly in April 2012, over its first 3 years, from 360 empty properties, 746 residential units were created. A large part of that was achieved with properties being converted, where large homes were no longer needed, but flats were needed. How do you change that? And the third one, really, the big myth is it costs too much, or some homes simply are beyond saving. And yeah, some homes might be beyond saving, but certainly not all of them. And as for the claim that it costs too much to retrofit an empty home, here's one of the main examples, possibly the biggest example that we see that proves that that's wrong. Woodside Flats in Glasgow. 18-storey tower blocks originally built in the 1960s that were thought to be destined for demolition. That's what it was. What it is now, an award-winning project. 314 flats retrofitted and refurbished, overall cost of 13.3 million. Doing the maths on that, it's £43,000 per flat, which is less than the financial costs, and it's also less than the environmental costs of demolishing and building new homes. So how was this achieved? The architect Rupert Daly on this said about it was taking a fabric-first approach, and by doing that, by retrofitting rather than demolishing, the whole life carbon footprint of these buildings is likely to be closer to net zero than most new builds, because there's not the extra building materials, it's just the fabric of the building. And the outcome for residents and for energy consumption is made clear. 70% reduction in operational carbon emissions, fuel poverty mitigated for more than 300 homes who've seen a reduction in their heating demand. As one resident said, "My heating is never on. It's a vast improvement on what it was." And I think anyone that's been in Glasgow or most other parts of Scotland will know to be able to say your heating is never on is something of a miracle to actually achieve. So we can say, yeah, that then, does this prove that retrofit's happening and retrofit's happening in empty buildings? So why are we still talking about it? Because it doesn't quite prove that. The flats in Glasgow weren't empty buildings. Although they were earmarked for demolition, they were actually still occupied, and they were saved from demolition by the residents following a consultation. They wanted to retain and improve the existing buildings. They wanted to improve the surrounding area. They didn't want to demolish, replace, and for them to relocate. But if it hadn't been for the residents, the chances are these buildings would have been demolished. With that comes embodied carbon emissions of demolition. New builds would have replaced them with the embodied carbon emissions of new builds. And these new homes might not have actually been for the old residents, further pushing the prices up in the city, further pushing people out and reducing the diversity. So if we take all of that, it's building up a case to say, yeah, we need to be looking at retrofitting our empty homes. And we need to start thinking about, well, what are the questions that we need to answer, to think about, can we do this? Does large-scale retrofitting work? And can it preserve social and affordable housing? Yes. Do we have a fair amount of empty homes in places where we have high demand for houses and spiralling prices and more? Yes, we know we do. Third question. So can we then just retrofit empty homes rather than build more homes, new homes, to meet our social and affordable housing demand? This isn't a yes. It's a no. But we do know that while we can't meet housing need through empty homes alone, they can make an important contribution. And we know it makes sense to use them. Why does it make sense? Because when we look at new builds, we're starting from scratch with land and materials needed. There's the time between finding the land and the building commencing, an average time of at least between 18 months and 2 years from when we have that approval to where the properties start to be delivered, at an average cost per home now estimated at least around 140,000. And all of this, if funding for housing associations is linked to their returns, if they're getting lower rent, Costs of 140,000, it's harder to access funding to build at the quantities that you need to meet the demand. And while that demand's going on, it's unmet, it's growing. It's lost rental income, 18 months to 2 years. That's 2 years worth of rental income, and it's other housing costs that are coming, whether that's bed and breakfast accommodation, any other associated costs. And also then the carbon footprint. With new homes, it's not just about the house. It's about the roads, the utilities, the public transport. It can take several decades for a well-insulated new home to make up for the high embodied carbon emissions. And that's assuming as well, if we're thinking about that the new home will have lower operational carbon emissions, that the old home can't be retrofitted to that standard. The Glasgow case study proves that they can. So with empty homes, what we're doing, we're making use of what's already there, the buildings and the land. You only need to acquire the property, and planning permission is only likely in exceptional cases. And that's normally about a conversion of use, not about actually building to begin with. The shorter times between acquiring the property and commencing work, the shorter time between commencing work and it coming to completion. If we take a guideline that's issued within council tax purposes, you're allowed 6 months if you purchase a property that needs structural renovation and alteration on it. If that figure is correct, that would suggest 6 months is a maximum time that you would need to convert a home such as the one in this picture here. And the carbon footprint is less because the building materials themselves are already in place and there's no out-of-town infrastructure requirements that have got to be considered. It's quicker delivery of homes to people in need, earlier generation of rental income and reduction of associated costs. So it's an asset that generates money sooner. It all makes the case for doing it. So again, we're back to the question, why are empty homes being missed out at the moment in calls for retrofitting? When we think about meeting housing demand, what we're thinking about is build, build, build. And with efficiency, we think about the bills, bills, bills. The efficiency of the homes that are lived in and not the homes that aren't. And when we talk about carbon emissions, we think about operational carbon, we ignore embodied carbon. All of this means that the link between building new homes and carbon emissions isn't being made, and the link between empty homes and meeting housing need isn't being made. And this is more than just a blind spot. It's something that's affecting our ability to deliver the housing we need and to reduce our carbon emissions to the levels that we need to reduce them by. We know the support for radical approaches to retrofitting. Just to take a couple of these, we recognise retrofitting homes and building is a critical component of the UK's net zero plan. We support Bankers for Net Zero in their efforts to find practical policy solutions and the public-private collaboration that will achieve this goal. With the right support, the retrofit industry can achieve an exponential takeoff during the 20s and 30s, delivering tangible economic, social and environmental benefits for the whole of the UK. And at last on this, we get a positive use of the term, the R number. The key to achieving this is putting together a package of long-term measures that gets the R number for retrofits rising by making it pay to go first and go deep. And this is a call from Bankers for Net Zero. They're calling for investments in it. But the calls are always coming for looking at the existing occupied stock. It needs to be extended to include our empty homes. And the case can be made, again, by looking at the information that Bankers for Net Zero have included in their report and just extending it further. They talk about an approach that needs to be holistic rather than piecemeal, treating heat and energy not as separate policy priorities, but as complementary elements. That can be extended. We need a holistic, not a piecemeal approach thinking about housing. We need to think about the housing the UK needs, including using the empty buildings and the new buildings as complementary elements in this. And we need to think about what they say when they're talking about the new homes that are expected to be built. It defies common sense to build these homes to anything other than a net zero standard. It defies common sense to build all these new homes if we have other homes lying empty that can be brought back to use with lower embodied carbon emissions. So it's just really extending the logic that's already in the documents that we're seeing. And looking at some of the options for doing this, some of these are taken from various documents, some of them are policy proposals that we've had within the Empty Homes Partnership, within Action for Empty Homes. So just to run through a few of them. First is the idea of the retrofit mortgage valuation. And this is something that came from Bankers for Net Zero, where they point out different things about how the energy efficiency of properties is improved with retrofitting. But what you find is mortgages are based on valuations of the property as is, rather than the property as it could be. And for net zero refits, there's a large value premium from it, but there's also large costs in converting it. And it's too much to be covered often by a conventional loan time frame. So how about valuation and mortgage on what the home will be worth, with a requirement to retrofit as a condition for that? And that helps then to get to that point of that kind of, if we get to sort of 100% cost that can cover this, it provides the incentive then to really get retrofitting going. But it's extending it to empty properties. It's saying for owners, if you want to buy an empty property, you can do, and we will help you. We will give you a mortgage that will enable you to retrofit it. We can look at with local government, council tax discounts, exemptions. We know they're based on a home when a home became empty. So often when you purchase the home, the discounts have run out. You may be charged immediately or 6 months after, double council tax. It's a barrier on taking up any empty property, let alone one if you want to get it to zero carbon emissions. So mandatory discounts on homes where the owner commits to net zero, releases funds for the owners, provides certainty. They're not gambling on discretion from councils. They know they would get the discretion. It can also be combined with grants or interest-free loans, depending what the end use of the property is, that can be funded through the revenue that's generated from the surcharge on homes where the owners aren't trying to bring them back into use. That money can be used to go towards homes that are being brought back into use to support net zero heating. And it could also be combined with removing additional dwelling supplements where the buyer commits to renting the home at social rate. If someone wants to bring the house back into use and at social housing, is it the most productive thing to charge them an additional dwelling supplement to do that? Other options, we see the Help to Build scheme that's been launched recently, 150 million. As it says, to ensure self and custom home building can become a realistic option to get onto the housing ladder. How about a Help to Rebuild scheme? It's kind of more of the same. It helps people get onto the housing ladder, but by paying the cost of retrofitting a long-term empty home. That money can go further with doing that. We can incentivize social housing providers to take on long-term empty homes. We know new builds come at a greater price for social housing providers, require more leverage finance, several years to see a return on investment, but we also know that it's harder to access the finance at the moment for retrofitting. So let's redress the balance and do more. Similar access to funding for VAT discounts, plus that kind of incentive. If it's carbon savings, that you can get extra funding for that. Bankers for Net Zero again call for an ambitious programme of deep retrofits. Just looking at the end part of this, with an allocation of 800 million over 500 years, which is 20% of the funds committed to social housing decarbonisation. So with that 800 million allocation, the UK government could retrofit 5,000 homes to a net zero standard. Their document goes on to say about how this then helps for the general financing by bringing the cost down, encouraging more lending that can work to then provide funding mechanisms that covers far more than that 5,000 homes a year. The overall case is made. Some aspects of the net zero transition involve us to choosing to make sacrifices today for the benefit of future generations. This is not one of them. A bold national retrofit strategy will benefit today's citizens as much as tomorrow. The time is right for a bold long-term natural retrofit strategy. This is the moment for a bold comprehensive strategy. As it says, it contributes to the government's levelling up agenda, slashing carbon emissions, making the UK's built environment the envy of the world. a powerful game-changing step that government can take to kickstart the revolution we need. All of these things are making the case for it. What we need to do now is to make sure that that push for retrofitting is extended to include our empty homes, to bring those back in, to realise the asset on our doorstep, and also realise the ambitions that governments have to reduce carbon emissions down to net zero. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for that, Andy. That was great. Really interesting, and I've had a couple of questions come through, but I'm going to hold them to the end. Because next I want to go on to Joe Patterson from the Welsh School of Architecture about exactly how deep retrofitting is done. Following Joe's brief introduction, Verity Kerr will be asking Joe to share a response to some of the most frequently asked questions we hear about how retrofitting works. Joe.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Joe Patterson. I'm a senior research fellow at the Welsh School of Architecture at Cardiff University, and the Welsh School of Architecture is very and has always had a high level of research that focuses on enhancing the built environment and linking that with creating a better planet as well. But my research over the last 12 years has focused on low carbon built environments and integrating whole house energy systems into the built environment. And that started with a Retrofit for the Future program that took place in the late 2000s. And then from there, I've been involved in the retrofits of more than 30 homes, whole house, plus the construction of an energy positive house that generates more energy than it uses over the year.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for being here. You talked there about whole house retrofit and the importance of whole house retrofit. Why is that so important compared to just, say, installing a heat pump, ground source heat pump or something? Why whole house?
Well, I mean, mainly we are not going to achieve net zero, anywhere near net zero, without focusing on the whole house. And a whole house therefore combines reduced energy demand, so including insulation on the walls, improving the fabric in general, incorporating low energy lighting, loft insulation, improving the quality of doors and windows. So we need to combine appropriate and applicable solutions to the right building stock to make sure that we achieve that net zero, or as near to net zero as we can. As Andy's alluded to already, the EPC is a driver. We need to do the whole house approach rather than separate individual solutions.
Mm. And in terms of how your projects were funded, was that done by government grants, and how was that process for you?
We've worked with social landlords a lot on our research, on our projects, and they have been researched. So we've been fortunate to sort of obtain some research funding. But sort of with regards to the sort of wider grant process in the UK, it's been very complicated and confusing over the last sort of 10 to 15 years. So we've had the feed-in tariff, which has changed over time. We've had the renewable heat incentive, which has also changed over time. The Green Deal, and currently the Green Homes Grant, which focuses on air source heat pumps. Installing an air source heat pump alone isn't right in some homes. An air source heat pump has to work really hard if it's installed in a very leaky old house with very little fabric improvements. And without combining or making this more whole house approach, we could be putting the wrong solutions in the wrong homes and therefore costing the occupants a lot more money to heat their homes, pushing more people into fuel poverty. So an air source, so at the moment, the Green Homes Grant for me isn't the right approach without some really clear information to help inform residents on what they should be putting into their houses.
Mm. So what's the Welsh Government's approach at the moment?
The Welsh Government's approach, both with regards to retrofitting and new build, has been quite innovative. At the moment, we've got two programs that are running: the Optimised Retrofit program, which is providing funding for social housing and local authorities to take a whole house approach. They've recently announced now in the last couple of weeks that they'll be contributing. The first tranche of funding was for 20 million, and now there's another 150 million coming through in the next couple of years. And that will focus on whole house and trying to encourage the supply chains to develop to enable retrofitting to happen. Obviously, empty homes will be a large part of that because of the social housing and local authorities. BEIS are also running similar programs in England. So there's the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is around £800 million. So I think from experience, I think targeting social housing is probably the right way forward to to encourage the supply chain development, because the supply chains with the new technologies are not really there at the moment, and they do need to build quickly to enable us to achieve what we need to achieve with regards to an improved building stock.
Mm-hmm. Just thinking back about regeneration, what Andy was talking about with the regeneration of areas, it's a language that's used a lot when talking about development. So when on these projects, I believe it's bungalows in rural Wales, wasn't it?
We've worked on a mix of houses. So the 30 houses that we have retrofits have been we've always tried to do very very typical houses, so that other social housing and local authorities can look to what we've done and use them as examples for their own stock as well. So it has been a mixture.
Yeah. So what has been the impact of that on the community in terms of things like regeneration and community?
I mean, the bungalows that you've just referred to be honest, that was a row of 6 bungalows that were built in the 1970s and were coming to the end of their useful life. Their EPC was G. Their SAT rating was less than 20, which really poor performance for the housing. The occupants had very high bills. They had fuel poverty. There was 2 of them were actually empty as well. And just the overall benefit is that they look so much nicer now that they've been, that aesthetics, their appearance is they just look so much better. But the other benefits that that the works provided is that they have much more consistent temperatures, which are much more comfortable. Humidity levels are much more consistent, which all impact on people's health and well-being. People are, if their home is unpleasant, they're afraid to bring visitors to come and see them, which obviously has an impact on their well-being and general lifestyle as well. But not only that, their bills, the residents' bills have reduced by up to 80%, and their overall carbon emissions have reduced by around 80% as well. So I think the co-benefits of retrofitting are significant. It's just very difficult to prove that until you've got large numbers of properties that you've done whole house retrofits on. And obviously you need to monitor and sort of evaluate the programs as they're happening to provide that evidence to then give people confidence to do the same in their own homes and housing stock.
Yeah, and I suppose if you think about fuel poverty and the aging population question, retrofitting bungalows sound like a really good solution. Problem.
Yeah, I think well, all the projects that we've worked on, the energy bills have reduced by way over 60%, and that's a huge saving for the residents. They are all in fuel poverty. They've all been in fuel poverty, and it just gives them the well-being and quality of life is just raised, because they don't have to worry quite so much about whether how much money do I need to spend on heating my home to a comfortable temperature and this week or this month. So
future proofing, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
So from a resident's point of view, how do residents have to change their behaviour, and what changes need to be made in order to involve, what are the changes involved in retrofitting?
I think that's a really critical part of the retrofitting process. And I think it needs to be introduced in the planning point, because we've always focused on trying to minimize the impact on the behavior of the occupants, so that they have to change their lifestyle as little as possible, and to be as less confused as to how to keep their home at as comfortable temperature. One of the things that we have done, however, is that we've in all of the projects that we've done, we've combined the demand reduction with energy generation and storage. And one of the things that we've tried to encourage people to do, because they've got battery storage and PV generation, is to use their appliances in the mornings. so that they use the energy being generated as it's being generated, and then their batteries can fill up in the afternoon then, so that they've got enough energy to take them through the evening to the following day. And just, some of the, I'd say probably 60% of our residents have understood that process principle, but some don't. And it's the language issue, and trying to encourage people to max or optimize the systems that they've got can be quite tricky. But yeah, I think when people can see the financial and comfort benefits, and they do try to change their behavior, the small amount that is usually needed.
Yeah, brilliant. And the final thing I wanted to ask you about was, what are the skills that are required in retrofitting, and what skills can be attained through the experience of retrofitting a property?
I think obviously you've got the traditional skills of designer, you've got your architects, you've got your plumbers, your electricians, and all of those kinds of people that need to be part of the retrofitting process to plan and design and install the technologies. But there's a lot of sort of softer skills that need to be involved, because you need to communicate across that process. So things like communication, procurement, ensuring that the technologies fit together and are designed together, and collaboration. And those softer skills are really important to ensure that the retrofits are delivered appropriately in the right building stock. And I think that's something that's really important to ensure that there's trust, and that the retrofits are accepted and then replicated at scale.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jo. That was wonderful.
Jo, that was really interesting. And Jo, I don't know whether you saw the ITN news last night. They've been running a housing campaign, and on that news, they've asked somebody to do an evaluation of the health benefits of actually tackling this. And they're saying that the kind of old houses and houses that could have a lot of work done on them, producing something like £1.4 billion worth of costs for the NHS. People turning up in hospitals. It's an astonishing report. I mean, it was also looking at, the amount of old stock that we've got, across Britain, and what needs to be done about that. I'm just wondering what's required, do you think, for government across? I mean, obviously in Wales, how was the argument made? How were the Welsh government persuaded to get behind what you're doing? Because there's obviously stuff going on in Scotland as well, Andy. Yeah, and I'm just wondering what the arguments were made, so that those of us that are across the border, as it were, might be able to make these arguments in London. What convinced them?
Shall I go? Well, yeah, in Wales, I think I was involved in a piece of work with them that helped to inform the process, where we sort of did a bit of an evaluation on the benefits of retrofitting at scale. Some of our case studies were actually used as to help inform that, and I think it's having the evidence of what benefits come out of retrofits, and unless you actually monitor projects that are happening and learn from what's happening on the ground, you don't have the evidence to convince others or governments or whoever is going to fund those projects to be able to say, yes, this, like you just said, the benefits of improved health. You need lots of evidence to prove that happens. In most of the houses that we've worked on, the health has improved, but the sample size is so small we can't prove that. But by just retrofitting 25, 30 houses, we've been able to prove on all of those that the energy bills have reduced so significantly that the residents have benefited from having more funds to provide a better quality of life. So Wales have looked at those small projects and taken it on board and decided that it is worth the investment to, provide large amounts of funding to social housing to upscale the projects.
Yeah, and Andy, what worked in Scotland?
Well, I think what's worked in Scotland is the Scottish government set ambitious net zero targets. So they're looking at 5 years ahead of the rest of the UK, with the aim for the emissions from heating to reach net zero. And within that, you've also had this far more, I would say, of a focus in Scotland on providing social and affordable housing. So Housing to 2040 that was published recently has a big call for 70,000, which has now been increased to 77,000 new social homes, and 100,000, which is now 110 after the SNP Green Deal, 110,000 affordable homes. So there's that commitment into social housing that perhaps isn't there south of the border. And that, I think, aligned with the commitments to net zero, has meant that the government has put a greater focus on setting ambitious targets for new social housing to meet net zero, for retrofitting all existing social housing. So that's been, I think, what that focus has been. But what we're still sort of hoping to see is more emphasis then put on the retrofitting of empty homes, because it's great to see this focus. Yeah, let's get net zero on social housing, but there's still, I think, there's work to be done to think about. Let's look at the homes that could be social housing that's lying empty, and then get that, I think, up to standard.
Right. Well, I think we'll be taking some of these lessons to Parliament in London, because I'm sure people are working on this, but I think it's quite urgent that we put these arguments across, because one of the things that people say is that, look, this is a big job that needs to be done quite quickly, actually, and it's kind of getting politicians to focus on funding that kind of stuff to make sure that it happens is the crucial thing. And it's really interesting when about evidence-based, because if there's a political will to do something, and often the evidence-based is kind of shuffled into view. This is why we're going to do it. And if there isn't the political will, then people say, well, we need the evidence base for this, So it's there. I think we just need to promote it. Just thinking about evidence-based, and this, you may have examples, both of you may not. In terms of international examples, Steve from Preston has asked, are there international examples that we can draw on? Is there kind of an international collaboration working on this, or what's going on the international front? Or is there nothing going on?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I've worked on a few international projects in the past, but I think obviously there's commonalities across in other countries, but I think the British climate and the British housing stock is quite unique, and I think it needs not necessarily different solutions, but it does it needs to be treated as being, the stock that we've had building regulations, we've had a process of historical development of the housing stock in the UK, and we need to focus on what we need. Obviously, we need to learn from international examples as well, but I think our stock is, it's one of the worst in Europe. So we need to focus on what the problems are with our stock, rather, and learn from international. But I think it's quite different.
Yeah, we are quite specific, are we?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of, we've done good things but not so good things over the years, and I think it's kind of that mix. Obviously, you've got countries like the Sweden and that use different heating systems to us, and it would take us a long time to build up to have centralized heating systems that they do in sort of more than we've got our own. It's being controlled by a lot of contextual issues that are unique to the UK. Like the fuel. The fuel or the oil crisis in the 70s also had a big impact. So it's just slightly different.
Right. No. Well, it's a common thing. People talk about, the peculiar specificities of Britain and how it's different, actually. And so that's really interesting. Andy, have you come across any examples?
Well, I think what we've seen more is different examples around bringing empty homes back to use to meet housing need or to revive areas. And often their retrofitting and energy efficiency can kind of become almost the side issue from it that they're looking at. So I went to an event last week where there was an American event about land banking, which land banking in America is generally not about building companies hoarding land that they're going to build on at some point in time. It's actually about sort of organizations that take on empty properties and where it becomes that vehicle for then these homes can now be recycled and reused. And with some things there, I was talking to people in Virginia and in Detroit, there's some interesting schemes that are used there to bring properties back in. But I say with those, it's as we're bringing it back in, thinking about what standard do we want it to come to straight away? So it's almost that kind of, sometimes it's that sort of like a locked in thinking that we've got empty homes, we're treating them almost as if they are new homes to give people the standards for that. So I think that's one of the things I picked up from there as an interesting kind of, as a general sort of attitude, I think, that runs through it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Andy, I've got a question about the retrofit example you were talking about, and you said the residents wanted to save the estate. How did that work? Because there's lots of people who are trying to prevent the demolition of council estates. And say they shouldn't be demolished, and so they'd be really interested actually in what happened to change the situation.
Well, I think that perhaps the main thing that happened is the housing association that was behind it consulted with the residents on what they wanted as their future for it. It was sort of actively involving them, and with the idea of what the visions were for the city centre as a whole in mind as well. So I think it was just that fact that they actually thought, yeah, let's ask people what they want, and let's see how we can work with what people want. And I think this is, obviously, as we all know, with the call for action about what we're asking for is really local communities to be given the choice and to be given the say and given the involvement in what happens to their communities. Because what we see from the Glasgow example is when this happens, communities will work to save the properties, to bring the properties that aren't used back in, and will look to retrofit them. So I think what they were doing with Woodside Flats, why it happened, why the residents got involved, was simply because it fitted within the visions of the council, it fitted within the visions of the housing association to get the community involved on it and get their views.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really key, actually. That's one of the key things about the call to action, as you were saying, that we're really focused on. Well, look, do we have any final questions from Bridget or Verity for our experts? No? Okay, well, thank you to both of you, and thank you to Bridget for the presentation on the call to action, and thank you for Verity for doing the interviewing, which I thought was fabulous. What I'd ask people to do is go to our website, Action on Empty Homes, sign our call to action, share it. If you can share it, that'd be really, really great. The more it's shared, the more people are signing it. And if you need more information from Action on Empty Homes, then sign up to our e-bulletin list. So thanks to the audience for watching. Thanks to our speakers for speaking. And with that, I will wish you all goodbye. Goodbye.